All right, so I got some alarming new polling data here for you guys on exactly how the American people are feeling that we should respond to the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. So before we get to the details of this polling data, I mean, this is still somehow a debate that is going on not just amongst the American public or within the media, but also at the highest levels of the US government. I mean, we actually still have, this far into this conflict, US officials who are not only suggesting that we do a no-fly zone over Ukraine, but also suggesting things like what we saw from Lindsey Graham the other day, that Putin should be straight up assassinated, all the way over to Donald Trump and Sean Hannity, who are pushing the idea that we should like secretly fly our planes over Russia and bomb them and then blame China for it or pretend like it was some other country. So just absolutely wild suggestions being floated out there. We've also gotten some pretty heated pushback from Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine himself, who basically said that we were weak, who said that NATO was weak for ruling out a no-fly zone. So here's what they say from Axios. They say, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused NATO leadership of giving the green light for further bombing of Ukrainian cities by refusing at Friday's summit to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine, saying those who oppose the move bear responsibility for civilian deaths going forward. So this is fucking wild. I mean, obviously you sympathize with the Ukrainian people, especially civilians. You sympathize with Zelensky himself. And I mean, you understand why he, as the person who is supposed to be protecting the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian sovereignty, you understand why he has the urge to try to get as much protection for his people as possible. So I'm not trying to, target him for wanting this in the first place, but you have to recognize that what you're calling for here is World War III. And World War III, a nuclear confrontation between the United States and Russia, who combined have enough nukes to completely evaporate all life on Earth multiple times, that confrontation would be significantly worse not only for the Ukrainian people, but for the entire planet. So you can't just casually be throwing this out here, and not only throwing it out there as a potential, but saying that we're weak. I mean, literally trying to critique NATO for not wanting to pop off World War III. It's just, this is fucking psychotic. This would not improve the material conditions or improve the safety of the Ukrainian people or anybody on Earth. So it needs to be rejected, and thankfully it currently is being rejected by the Biden administration. But again, I mean, saying that we're giving them a green light for the bombing of Ukrainian cities is insane. I mean, we're imposing near maximum sanctions that we possibly could on Russia, including sanctions that are hurting innocent civilians. We are flooding Ukraine with more weapons than any country has seen since World War II. So we're doing just about as much as possible, if not even potentially already crossing some red lines, in bringing us that much closer to an escalating confrontation between NATO and Russia. So we're already arguably past the border of where we should be, and if not that, then we're already up as far as we could possibly go to the border of what we can be doing right now. So again, this has to be rejected. Now, on the polling data, here's where it gets even more alarming than all of that, because based on how the media has been talking about this, based on how even, I guess, our public officials have been covering this situation, the American people straight up have no fucking idea what a no-fly zone means. I mean, the American people seem to think that a no-fly zone is like a magic spell that you just cast over an area and then Russian planes can no longer enter that airspace. That's not what a no-fly zone is. A no-fly zone is a guarantee from either NATO or the United States directly that we will shoot down Russian aircraft and even target Russian, landing strips, etc. So that is what a no-fly zone is, and that is war, okay? There's no way around that. You can't shoot down Russian aircraft with NATO or US weaponry directly and then expect that Russia is not going to consider that an act of war. It definitely is. So here's the breakdown on the polling data. They say from Reuters that a broad bipartisan majority of Americans think the United States should stop buying Russian oil and gas and work with NATO to set up no-fly zones to protect Ukraine from Russian airstrikes, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll completed on Friday. Now, I'm going to skip this and get back to this section here, but they also say some other interesting data points here, that some 74% of Americans, including solid majorities of Republicans and Democrats, basically support NATO imposing this no-fly zone. So 74%, keep that in your mind, 3/4 of the American people, based on what they know about no-fly zones right now, thinking it's a magic spell, 74% of them support enacting this no-fly zone, okay? 3/4 of the American people. Now, we're going to circle back to this, but some other data points, they say an equally bipartisan 80% of the American people said that the United States should stop buying Russian oil, and the White House on Friday said it was weighing cuts to U.S. imports of Russian oil, though it is proceeding cautiously, concerned about a spike in gasoline prices that would add to high inflation. Now, gas prices have been absolutely skyrocketing recently. They're damn near more right now than they have been throughout the entirety of the pandemic, where we've had these complete breakdowns in supply lines. I've seen later updates that Joe Biden is planning to go meet with Saudi Arabia to try to basically repair some of those relations and get them to release some of their strategic oil reserves. Now, I oppose trying to mend our relationship with Saudi Arabia. If anything, we should be treating them much more as a pariah, as Joe Biden said that he was going to do when he was running on the campaign trail. We should not be trying to forge closer bonds with Saudi Arabia and bending over for them to continue this ongoing genocide in Yemen, but that's sort of a separate question. The point being made is, should we ban the import of Russian oil? I'm not necessarily against that, but basically what you would have to do in order to avoid the inflationary spike in the immediate sense, in the long-term sense, obviously, transitioning into renewable energies is the solution. In the short-term sense, yeah, you're going to have to expand either our domestic oil production, which if you are going to do that, my suggestion would be that we nationalize our oil production here in the United States so that private corporations and capitalist enterprises are not able to use this as an opportunity to go sell our domestic oil supply around the world on the global markets, further increasing inflationary pressures. If we're going to expand domestic oil or natural gas production to keep those prices low, you would have to nationalize these industries. So I would support doing that if that's the direction you want to go. Or you could go and actually try to repair our relations with Iran or Venezuela, and maybe in exchange for dropping some of our criminal sanctions on those countries, they would then release some of their strategic oil reserves. So there's multiple different ways you could go about doing this specifically with Russian oils, but that's just basically my take on that. They also say that, moreover, 81% of Americans think that Washington should impose additional sanctions on Russia, up from 77% in a poll that was conducted Monday and Tuesday. Support was also bipartisan for this. So listen, again, I think this is more of an example of how the American people don't necessarily understand the specifics and the details of the sanctions we've already imposed on Russia. I mean, we've basically already launched the nuclear sanctions, as they are called. We are completely imploding the Russian economy in a way that is not only just marginally hurting the oligarchs and Putin, but is completely destroying the lives of millions and millions of innocent Russian civilians who don't even support this war in the first place. So if anything, I would argue that our sanctions are way too broad and are being deployed in a way that is going to and currently is hurting innocent civilians, and I completely don't support that. If you want to go after, seize the assets of the oligarchs, if you want to go after Putin, then do those sanctions in that way, but don't do these overly broad sanctions that are just going to hurt civilians and aren't even going to bring about the desired result. Because keep in mind, when people say that these sanctions are intended to hurt civilians, specifically to try to foment some sort of an uprising within Russia to replace Vladimir Putin, you got to understand that Russian military doctrine, okay, under Vladimir Putin, explicitly states, and he has openly stated this multiple times, that if there is a threat to his position in power, if there is a threat to the current government that is in power in Russia, he will resort to using nuclear weapons, okay? So you have to keep that in mind. It's not even necessarily a good thing to completely destabilize a nuclear power like Russia right now and back Vladimir Putin into a corner where he feels like his only response is to potentially retaliate with nuclear weapons, okay? You cannot do that, so that should be off the table as well. But 81% of the American people think we need more sanctions than what we're doing right now. I would probably argue if you wanted to add additional ones, maybe go after their energy sector, which is sort of what they were talking about before. That would actually hurt Vladimir Putin more so than a lot of these other broad sanctions. But finally, they say some 77% of respondents said the U.S. should seize the assets of the Russian oligarchs. Completely in favor of that. In fact, I think we should seize the assets of all oligarchs across the planet, right? Including here in the United States. So that's my position on that. Now, circling back to the no-fly zone specifically, okay? So here's the key point. So again, remember, 74% of the American people say that they support a no-fly zone. Now, here's a direct contradiction to that, okay? They say it was not clear if respondents who supported a no-fly zone were fully aware of the risk of conflict, and majorities opposed the idea of sending American troops to Ukraine or conducting airstrikes to support the Ukrainian army. So if the majority of the country doesn't support conducting airstrikes to support the Ukrainian army, That is what a no-fly zone is. This is like the definition of a no-fly zone. And the American people somehow are supporting it by 74%, even though they're also saying that they don't support a direct military conflict. So again, the way that these polls are being conducted are extremely misleading. Okay, so if you see all of these headlines of, broad consensus of Americans support a no-fly zone, don't believe them, because the overwhelming majority of the American people oppose a direct military confrontation between NATO, between the United States and Russia. So if that is the case, then a no-fly zone is not on the table. That's how that correlation works right there. That's just the definition of what a no-fly zone is. So that's a problem with how they're conducting these polls and not being specific about exactly what it means. It's also, arguably the fault of our media for ratcheting up the tensions right now and refusing to accurately inform people in the terms of what some of these things actually mean. Now, thankfully, again, the Biden administration has been openly opposed to the idea of a no-fly zone. This is the latest Blinken on no-fly zone discussions. We're trying to end this war in Ukraine, not start a larger one. So I'm absolutely no fan of Anthony Blinken in pretty much any way, shape, or form, but he's 100% correct on that. We should be working with diplomatic efforts in order to de-escalate this war, imposing more sanctions, sending more troops to eastern Ukraine, or sending more fighter jets and using our fighter jets to shoot down Russian aircraft. Imposing a no-fly zone is not going to help bring about peace for the Ukrainian people. It will only lead to further escalation and further destruction, and bringing us that much closer to the brink of a nuclear confrontation, which again, just as a reminder, as horrible and terrible it is for the Ukrainian people right now, a nuclear confrontation between the United States and Russia would absolutely be worse for the entirety of the planet. So that's what needs to be focused on right now. That's what needs to be opposed, and continue working with diplomatic efforts to try to end this war in whatever capacity is possible.